Order, please. We'll now begin with the daily routine, beginning with presenting and reading of petitions, presenting reports of committees, tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to beg leave to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the members' attention to the East Gallery, where I'd like to introduce two special guests from the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation. With us are Marley McNeil, the Executive Director of Innovation and Collaboration, and Emily Faulkner, the Communications Officer. I ask my colleagues of the House to give them a warm welcome.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a report entitled the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation 2017-18 Annual Report, A Solid Foundation.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first, before I do that, I'd like to make an introduction if I could.
Permission granted.
In the East Gallery, we have two very prominent business people in the community, and I would like to introduce them. They're Stuart Creaser and Lorraine Valiso, and I hope I pronounced your name if you both stand. They're the owners of Avondale Sky Winery, and they're setting a new standard for wines in the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice in a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2018, Lieutenant Governor's Award for Excellence in Nova Scotia Wines recognized the exceptional quality of locally sourced and produced wines and honors the dedication and craftsmanship of Nova Scotia's wine industry. Avondale Sky Winery, located in Avondale Peninsula, owned and operated by Stuart Creaser and Lorraine Valiso, is the recipient of the 2018 Lieutenant Governor's Award for the one of the best wines in their Martok 2014. Avondale Sky Winery has also won other awards, including the 2018 Atlantic Canadian Wines Award for the Best Class White Single Vinarial Hybrid for their 2017 Avondale Sky Muscat, and the 2018 Atlantic Canada Wine Awards for the Best Class Dessert Wine with NV Martok Late Harvest Vinal. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Avondale Sky Winery of Newport Landing and Stuart Creaser and Lorraine Valiso for their outstanding contributions in Nova Scotia wine industry. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Aquaculture and Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Grand Pré Wineries is owned and operated by Hans-Peter Stutz, a former banking executive of Switzerland, who moved his family to Grand Pré to follow his dream of operating a winery in the Annapolis Valley. Whereas Grand Pré Wineries, one of the oldest farm wineries in Atlantic Canada, has received several awards, including their third Wine Spectre Award of Excellence for their wine list at the Le Cavallo 2018 Atlantic Wine Awards. The best of the class Tidal Bay 2017, Tidal Bay, and the best class single red hybrid 2015, Vintners Reserve Merlot. Whereas Mr. Stutz was instrumental in the development of the Magic Winery Bus and one of the kind hop-on, hop-off guided tour of 4 local wineries in beautiful Annapolis Valley has become a popular attraction for thousands of tourists and local alike. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Grand Pré Wineries and Hans-Peter Stutz and Grand Pré Wines on their world-class winery and the many awards, and thank them for their outstanding contributions to Nova Scotia's wine industry. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I make an introduction?
Permission granted.
In the East Gallery this morning is Alex Morrison, Vice President of the Library Boards Association of Nova Scotia, and his wife Elizabeth McMichael. If they would rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the month of October is recognized as National Library Month, and whereas libraries are local centres for information, literacy development, and a welcoming place for all Nova Scotians, where a diverse range of knowledge and information is made available and cultural awareness and engagement is promoted. And whereas libraries across Nova Scotia provide these important services to their communities, a service that helps build stronger and more vibrant communities, and that the Government of Nova Scotia values, supports, and continues to invest in. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me in recognizing the month of October as Library Month across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I could make a further introduction, please.
Permission granted.
Thank you. In the West Gallery this morning, are joining us today are very special guests. The people behind the mobile food market, which serves communities here in the Halifax Regional Municipality. And if they could rise as I introduce them. Amy Gasparato, Holly Gillis. Oh, they came to this. Oh, they moved over to the West Gallery. They're right in front of me now. Holly Gillis, Kelly Poirier, and Julia Kemp, who is manager of the mobile food market. And they've been very instrumental in a very important service to our communities. Let's give them the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the mobile food market is a valuable service that brings affordable and healthy food, including fresh fruit and vegetables, directly to Nova Scotians in 7 communities in the Halifax Regional Municipality. And whereas it is an innovative model that, in addition to connecting people with affordable and fresh food in their communities, is also helping to strengthen communities by bringing people, seniors, newcomers, families and others together to meet and build new friendships and connections. And whereas the mobile food market is a joint project made possible by the leadership of United Way Halifax, the Halifax Regional Municipality, the Nova Scotia Health Authority, Partners for Care, the Ecology Action Centre, and the Atlantic Superstore. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House join me in recognizing the leadership and outstanding work of all those involved with the mobile food market and congratulate them on the success of bringing this important service to more communities in Nova Scotia and for their role in helping to strengthen our province's communities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas October 5th marks World Teachers' Day, which recognizes the hard work and dedication that teachers demonstrate when educating students, and whereas the theme of this year's World Teachers' Day recognizes teachers as the heartbeat of public education. And whereas in Nova Scotia, we have more than 9,000 teachers who support more than 100,000 students each year, therefore be it resolved that all members of this legislature recognize today October 5th is World Teachers Day, and to also recognize the commitment and important work that teachers in Nova Scotia provide our students each and every day. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Daniel McNeely is a Halifax-based neurosurgeon at the IWK Health Centre, and whereas recently, before conducting neurosurgery on an 8-year-old patient, Dr. Daniel McNeely was asked by the patient to help patch up his teddy bear. And whereas Dr. McNeely took the time to bring the young patient's teddy bear into the operating room, where he stitched the bear up, providing his patient with kindness and comfort. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize Dr. McNeely for going above and beyond in his role as a neurosurgeon and for demonstrating how small acts of kindness can make a big difference. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Department of Justice, the Nova Scotia Judiciary, and our many justice partners continue to work closely together to provide greater access to justice for all Nova Scotians, and whereas the establishment of free legal clinics in Halifax in 2015, Sydney in 2017, and now Yarmouth this past summer provides support and legal advice at no cost to individuals representing themselves on civil law matters and most family law appeals in the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal. And whereas this very valuable service is made possible because of the support and enthusiasm of volunteer lawyers in our communities. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House join me in congratulating the province's newest free legal clinic in Yarmouth on their official opening in July, and thank the Yarmouth area law firms of D'Entremont and Boudreau, Lynette Muse Law, Pink Star Barrow, Leblanc Law Inc., Nickerson Jacquard Fraser, Donald Harding QC, Hood Fraser D'Entremont, and Nova Scotia Legal Aid for devoting significant hours to support Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas there are 17 million people across the world living with cerebral palsy, a complex disability that affects movement, and whereas every case of cerebral palsy is unique to the individual, and whereas October 6th is World Cerebral Palsy Day, a time to celebrate the important contributions that people with cerebral palsy make in our communities and our province. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize October 6th as World Cerebral Palsy Day. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. There
has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. We'll now move on to introduction of bills. Notices of the Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to bring forward a bill, an act to prohibit certain public-private partnerships.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Prohibit Certain Public-Private Partnerships.
Bill number 81, entitled An Act to Prohibit Certain Public-Private Partnerships.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. We'll now move on to notices of motion. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to recognize the patience, perseverance, and diligent work that was performed over 6 years by the volunteer committee that researched the rich history of the Alma, Greenhill, and Sylvester area. This local historical information, which was collected, was recently unveiled as a new kiosk in the community of Greenhill. Many locals also came forward with artifacts, stories, and folklore that will now be passed along to visitors and the younger generations to enjoy. enjoy. The panel includes information regarding the grist mill axe factory, which was once located in the area, along with much more interesting facts. I am so appreciative of those who have donated their time and effort to complete the research and create this beautiful and informative kiosk. Our history will not be forgotten. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to celebrate World Teachers' Day. I'm here in no small part because of... What? I rise today to celebrate World Teachers' Day. I'm here in no small part because of the teachers I had along the way. Mrs. Ohm, who taught me how to write numbers, I still remember her showing me that the year was changing from 1979 to 1980. Mr. Visser, the kind principal who let me eat lunch in his office most days in the worst year of my social life in grade 4. Mrs. Boyle, who cared enough to call my parents in the middle of my grade 10 year to tell them that I had missed a couple of classes and that I probably shouldn't skip school if I wanted to keep going. Mr. Abbott, my cranky and brilliant grade 12 political science teacher and RAF veteran who occasionally yelled at us in Swahili but always took seriously his task to train a group of politically literate and curious teenagers. Mrs. Stulak, Mrs. Campbell, Mrs. Desmond, and all of the teachers under whose care and guidance I place my own children each morning. Teaching is truly a noble profession, and today and every day I am honored to express my gratitude and support for teachers, the ones who brought me here, the ones who are nurturing my children now, and all of the others who quite literally have the future in their hands.
I'd like to remind all the members once again the time limit for member statements is 1 minute as per the clock on the wall. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to commend the fine work being done by Bay Rides, an accessible, affordable, community-based, door-to-door transportation option for residents of St. Margaret's Bay. Bay Rides serves residents from Westover to Hubbards. They also provide service into Halifax for medical appointments. Peter Delafus, my good friend and a former member of this House, is the newly elected president of Bay Rides. Peter says they are very fortunate to have a team of dedicated volunteer drivers to drive their small fleet of vehicles, which makes the program possible to operate. Residents may book 24 hours in advance and, depending on the distance involved, may pay a modest fee. However, through the community transportation and accessible transportation programs, the provincial government is helping to ensure Nova Scotians have access to reliable transportation options in areas not served by municipal transportation. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating the excellent work done by Bay Rides and to wish them well in their future endeavours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I would like to recognize the Cole Harbour Parks and Trails Association. The association's board of directors is chaired by Michael McFadden. The trails included in this association are the Cole Harbour Heritage Park and Trails, the Salt Marsh Trails, the Shearwater Flyer Trail, the Bissett Trail, and the Forest Hills Trail. As you can imagine, the countless amount of volunteer hours grows each year with the increase in trail user each day. In July 2017, there were more than 4,000 visitors to the Salt Marsh Trails alone. The number of volunteer hours for the 2017 year was over 2,000 hours. I ask all members of the Nova Scotia Legislature to join me in thanking Michael McFadden and all of the volunteers of the Cole Harbour Parks and Trails Association for their hard work and dedication to our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, on this World Teacher Day, I want to celebrate a special kind of teacher, the high school drama teacher. In particular, I want to recognize all those drama teachers that have ever taken their students to the Nova Scotia High School Drama Festival. For 10 years, I was co-producer of the Drama Festival, which takes place annually at Dalhousie. Students from all over the province descend upon Dal to take workshops, showcase productions. They have worked on at their schools, and they have an amazing time connecting with fellow drama students. It's a weekend full of creativity and fun and utterly devoid of sleep. The teachers who bring their their kids to this festival are dedicated, special people. They work hard on their student productions. They do an endless amount of organizing. And at the festival, they make sure the productions get up and running. They kid wrangle, and then they take their own professional development workshops and connect with other teachers on best practices in drama education. I want to honor the people I met during those years: Stan Christie, Millie Hunt, Aaron Morris, Natalie McIsaac, Chris Lugar, Ron Leotold, Glenda McCabe, David Zink, Rob Weigel, Melanie Kennedy, Jonathan Church, Jonathan Grady, Joanne Cantwell, Lorraine Cantwell, Steve Coates, Jennifer Delory, Rob Lutz, and many, many more.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
On this World Teachers' Day, I'd like to give a thank you, a shout out to Mr. Minicello, English teacher at Herring Cove Junior High for almost 40 years. Actually, I think Minnie got 40 years, so he was recently retired. Mr. Minicello, or Minnie as we all knew him, was known for his sense of humor and helping people out, but also he was known for giving graph paper. So if you were bad in his class, you had to put your initials in each square of the graph paper. I am proud to say that in grade 9, I had 3 full booklets of graph paper done, and it's something Mr. Minicello has never forgotten. So, Minnie, thank you for all you did for every single student, and I hope you're enjoying your retirement.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize World Teachers' Day. There is not a person in this legislature who hasn't been impacted by a great teacher. They are often the unsung heroes of our communities, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia is lucky to have thousands of teachers who are dedicated to their craft and focused on maximizing learning in and out of the classroom. Nova Scotia teachers are innovative. They are compassionate, they are hardworking, and they are professional. They are there for our students day in and day out and go above and beyond the call of duty. Mr. Speaker, on this World Teachers' Day, I ask all Nova Scotians to pause and reflect on the positive impact teachers have had on our youth. And I ask all members of this House, Mr. Speaker, to recognize the critical role teachers play in building the future of Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, on this World Teachers' Day, I want to express my appreciation for the teaching teams at St. Joseph A. McKay, Joseph Howe, St. Stephen's, St. Catherine's, and Highland Park Junior High, who I know are using all their energy and intelligence and heart to nurture and instruct the children in their care. I was honoured to attend several school closing ceremonies in June, and I had the chance to witness the very intricate organizing effort led by teachers that went into marking the rite of passage of students finishing grade 6 or grade 9. I remember in my own life the crucial role of teachers in noticing my potential and encouraging me to develop it. And I am truly grateful to know that many young citizens of Halifax Needham are receiving a similar gift today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had no marks on any graph paper. I rise today to congratulate Curtis Raymond of Mahone Bay for being chosen to attend the Rotary Adventure and Citizenship Program in Ottawa. This program offers students from all across Canada the opportunity to gather in Ottawa to experience tours, lectures, discussions, and social events designed to enhance their understanding and appreciation of Canadian citizenship. Curtis applied for this program through the Rotary Club of Bridgewater and District. As part of the application process, Curtis prepared a video entitled "A Day in My Life as a Canadian." He was also required to submit references and wrote an essay addressing the question, "What does Canadian citizenship mean to me?" Curtis said that the highlight of his trip was the tour of the parliamentary buildings and sitting in the members' seats. Mr. Speaker, I ask that you and all members of this House of Assembly please join me in congratulating Curtis Raymond on being selected to experience the Rotary Adventure and Citizenship Program in Ottawa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to sports, winning is not necessarily all that counts, as the Colchester Royals prove. This team made it to the Canadian Championships in Napanee, Ontario last month, with grand hopes of bringing home a medal after narrow misses in the past 2 years. Unfortunately, after 4 days, the medal once more eluded the team. However, their sportsmanship, competitiveness, and determination to try again remains. The team tweeted from Napanee on August the 18th that their loss has been tough, but they wished all the remaining teams good luck. Mr. Speaker, this display of good sportsmanship makes our community as proud as any medal would. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Teachers Day, I want to pay tribute to one of my heroes and one of the best teachers I know, David Leblanc. As a child, I looked up to my big brother for many reasons, from his awesome cub car racing skills to his abilities with both air guitar and drums, to his dedication to teaching me lyrics of his favorite 80s rock songs. As a teacher for 26 years, he got his bachelor's degree in French from SMU, his teaching degree from the Teachers College, and his master's from Acadia. He started teaching at Sir Robert Borden, doing what most would consider the unthinkable, teaching French to junior high kids. From there, he moved to Brookside Junior High, where then Vice Principal Bill Estabrooks took a leave of absence to run for provincial office, and the rest of that story is history. He was a VP at many junior highs and now is principal at Goresbrook. David has always been a teacher first. The respect and kindness with which he treats all of his students and staff is inspiring, and his positive leadership is palpable. In spite of this government's best efforts, as changes go forward in our education system, he will continue to practice instructional leadership and not management of the schools he finds himself in. Thank you.
The member for Clayton Park West.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize an exceptional young leader from my riding who helped to make prom affordable and inclusive for students at Halifax West High School. Keely Barnable was the executive liaison to the prom committee during the 2017-2018 school year. Throughout the year, Keely organized a variety of fundraisers to help reduce the cost of prom. Most notably, she organized a prom expo where students could purchase second-hand prom dresses at a discount price. Her efforts helped to dramatically reduce the cost of prom for students who might not have otherwise had the means to attend. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the House of Assembly join me in commending Keely for her work to make prom an inclusive experience for students at Halifax West. I wish her the best of luck in her future endeavours. Thank you.
Order. There's a lot of chatter in the chamber. I realize it's Friday and everybody's excited for the end of the week, but just ask that I will give you all graph paper if you continue, so let's keep the chatter to a dull roar. The member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Special Olympians from across Canada came to Antigonish last summer to compete in the 2008 Canada Summer Games. 9 athletes from the Lunenburg Queens region took part in this national event, bringing home 14 medals. 2 athletes and 2 coaches were from Bridgewater. Jennifer McIntosh won bronze in the 200-meter and silver in the 400-meter, and Krista Stockman placed 4th in golf. Cody Latta and Jim Stockman were selected as coaches for Team Nova Scotia. These games served as a qualifying event for the 2019 Special Olympics World Summer Games that will take place in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates next April. It was recently announced that Krista Stockman and her coach Jim Stockman have been selected to represent Canada. I request the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Jennifer, Krista, Cody and Jim and all the athletes of Special Olympics Lunenburg Queens for the success at the recent Summer Games. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on December the 1st, the Sackville Heights Elementary School will be holding its 4th annual holiday market. Last year, a total of 60 vendors, including artists, handcrafters, and businesses, all participated in their event. Mr. Speaker, 100% of the money raised from this event goes back to the school to help fund the arts, culture, and science events throughout the year. In addition, it will also allow guest speakers and bus trips. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to thank both Sarah Case as well as Becky Forrest, along with all the other volunteers at the Sackville Heights Elementary School, for all their hard work in organizing this and many other events throughout the year, and wish them great success in this upcoming endeavour. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to celebrate World Teachers' Day. Thank you to the teachers I had that guided me, taught me, and tried to keep me in line. I know you find that hard to believe. I've had a moment or two where I had to kneel in front of the class or actually be put out of the class because I talked just a little too much. Sadly, my uncle taught at the same school and walked a lot faster than I and made it home first and always told on me. So by the time I got home, I was in quite a bit of trouble. But thank you to those teachers for keeping me in line, because I am where I am today because of those teachers. And thank you to all of the teachers across this province for teaching, caring, and at a lot of times providing for the children day to day. Thank you again.
The member for Kings West. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to highlight the successes of the Aylesford District Lions Red Cross Swim Program. Located at the Clahaney Campground Pool in Aylesford, the program has had an incredible impact with over 2,800 registrants learning life-saving skills since its inception. Following a cooperative model, the program is subsidized by the Aylesford Lions Club to keep registration fees affordable for families. The pool on site was also built through the Lions fundraising efforts, and they continue to cover the maintenance costs associated with the upkeep. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the province of Nova Scotia, I would like to extend my sincerest congratulations to the Aylesford Lions Club and the Clahaney Campground on their partnership and continued success with the Red Cross Learn to Swim program, and wish them all the best for another successful season in 2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Sydney River Mire Lewisburg.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge students and staff of Riverside School in Albert Bridge who have had a very busy September. Riverside School welcomed 214 students this year, and they raised over $500 for the Terry Fox Foundation, where the students walked or ran in the bus loop to raise this money. Students also brought in donations to Loaves and Fishes in Sydney, where they were made aware that there were a shortage of fresh vegetables and canned goods. Riverside students also participated at the Myra Fair Ferry, helping out with several of the events during the day. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of the House to thank the students at Riverside School and the staff for all the efforts they have made in this community and all the surrounding areas to make it such a great place to grow up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the North End Community Health Centre's addition of a dental clinic. The dental clinic is a response to the needs of our community, where affordable dental services are required and often inaccessible. Many residents of Nova Scotia are unable to afford dental services, often ignoring their dental and therefore overall health care because of the barrier of cost. The North End Community Health Centre is an exception and a leader in offering care to those who are unable to afford it. This year, the dental clinic will be expanding its services to address the needs of youth through a partnership with Schools Plus that will allow students to access these vital services. I rise to congratulate the North End Community Health Centre for its continued effort to improve the lives of Halifax Needham residents with a complete collaborative approach to dental, mental and physical health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Antigonish.
Mr. Speaker, the Tracadine District Volunteer Fire Department is celebrating its golden anniversary this year. Mr. Speaker, that's 50 years of providing community service, and over the course of those 50 years, there are 5 founding members of the department who are still active. Those members are John Delory, Miles Summers, Charles Punch, Ralph Maddie, and John Maddie, who is also the department's current chief. The department celebrated this special milestone with an open house on August 5th, followed by a breakfast the following morning, when these 5 founding firefighters were named life members of the department. Mr. Speaker, after 50 years of being a volunteer firefighter, these 5 men deserve special thanks for their dedication and service to their community.
The honourable member for Queen Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Liverpool Privateers host their 5th home opener on Saturday, October 6th at 7 p.m. at Queen's Place Amherst Centre. The Privateers have won the hearts of Queens County with their entertaining brand of hockey. This year's home opener celebrations will include some of the fans' favourites from the past and a surprise recognition to one of their dedicated volunteers. Over the past 4 years, the Privateer awesome fans have proven to be not only the biggest crowd, but the loudest crowd in the league, with fans packing the rink every Saturday night. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of this House to join me in wishing the Liverpool Privateers a great season and thank all their volunteers who work so hard to make sure we can enjoy this level of hockey right on our Queens of Mara Pond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After hearing from women who experienced sexual assault only to leave the Truro Hospital and RCMP more traumatized than they were before because there were no SANE services available, I've stood on the floor of this House countless times now throughout this legislative session requesting a SANE program for our hospital in Truro. And now, according to a letter received yesterday by one of these survivors, a constituent, the Minister of Health says that Truro will be getting a sexual assault nurse examiner. So I'm very pleased about this, and I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the Minister, to thank him, and also to thank the women who came forward and for helping to achieve this. The letter is light on details and no timeline is put in place. So I have to say that I'm glad that the Minister has taken it seriously, but until we have a date for SANE services to begin in Truro, I and the women of Colchester will not rest. Thank you.
The member for Hants East.
Breaking one school record in any sport is an impressive feather in your cap, Mr. Speaker, but when an individual shatters 4 records in 4 different events, we're talking about a superstar athlete. I'd like to introduce the House to Jamie McLeod, a member of the Hants East Rural High girls soccer team, holding the top scorer title and voted Rookie of the Year. Her speed served her on the soccer field and also on the track, where her 4x400 team picked up a regional win and advanced to the provincials. She picked up a silver in the 100 metre when she was clocked at a time of 1.02 minutes in the 400 metre at the district level. She broke her 4th school record. And justifiably so. Jamie was named as a finalist in the 14 and under female East Hants Sports Awards. Please join me in offering our congratulations to Jamie McLeod for her determination and athletic accomplishments and wish her all the best in her future endeavours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before we move on, I'd like to thank the member from Sackville-Cobequid for the gift of the graph paper, and I assure you I still know how to fill it out. The member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Gregor Maclean, a reservist from Sydney Mines in the Cape Breton Highlanders. Gregor was chosen to stand watch over the tomb of the unknown soldier in front of the National War Memorial in Ottawa. The remains of the tomb are those of an unknown Canadian soldier and represent approximately 116,000 Canadians who gave their lives for this country. As a sentry, the biggest duty is to be the voice of the dead and tell people why the memorial is there. I'd like to take this opportunity to salute Gregor Maclean and congratulate him on being given the honour of serving at such a prestigious location in our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Wish my baby girl, Alexandra, happy birthday. Giving her lots of love to my beautiful wife, Jill, and our new baby girl, Olympia.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Richmond.
I rise today to acknowledge all teachers in the Strait Regional Centre for Education and the Nautical Institute in Port Hawkesbury. I beg your pardon, Port Hastings. Quality teaching is the #1 factor in student success, and for that reason we need to celebrate our teachers and the work that they do daily to care for, support, and prepare youth for tomorrow's society. Mr. Speaker, whether you live in a rural community or urban centre, are a child in a secondary or post-secondary school, small class sizes or large, everyone can point to at least one teacher who has left a positive impact on their lives. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the House join me in celebrating teachers across Nova Scotia on this World Teachers' Day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare Digby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, this July I made my way to the Sacré-Cœur Church in Soniaville to the Guild Canadienne de Clare's quilt exposition, this time accompanied by my mother and a couple of her friends. This marks the 14th year the Guild displayed their quilts in the church. It included over 200 quilts. Most were projects completed by the members of the Guild, but there were a few family treasures passed down to their current owners. As the group did in previous years, the Guild made a special quilt for this year's exposition, a quilt for the 250th anniversary of Clare. Each member contributed a square to the project, the square representing some aspect of our community or its history. The quilt was the centerpiece of this year's exhibition. A very popular exhibition is also a fundraiser for the church where the quilts are displayed, an acknowledgement by the Guild to the church for letting them meet in the Parish Centre Hall. The Guild continues to promote the art of quilting and produces projects which will be admired for generations, as well as give back to the community's church. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to remember one of my constituents, Robert Meisner of Amherst. He recently passed away on August 28th this year. Robert was frequently in my office to share often inside knowledge and offer encouragement to my staff and me. Robert was an entrepreneur and worked in the woods for most of his life. I was very sad to learn of his passing, but happy to know he passed away where he was mostly at peace, and that was in the woods. He will be missed by many in our community. Mr. Speaker, I ask all MLAs to join me today in remembering Mr. Robert Meisner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Truro-Biberhill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today on World Teacher Day, I just want to acknowledge all the wonderful teachers who came out and had their voices heard during last their winter of discontent, when they came out in droves to the Legislature right across the province in snowstorms, holding picket signs, telling the government what they felt about how they were being treated. And many of these teachers were younger teachers who'd never been politically active in their lives. And I have to say that what happened because of that, even though in the end they did not receive the treatment or the result that they had intended and hoped for, I believe that these people have now been politicized, and they realize how important it is to pay attention to politics and to see who is actually in government, who is going to have their backs when they need it. And I have to say, we here in the NDP caucus appreciate every single one of them and will always have their back. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax-Armdale.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to give thanks and celebrate the blessings of the past year. I wish all my colleagues in the House, my constituents, and all Nova Scotians a very happy Thanksgiving. Take time this weekend to mark the occasion with extended family and neighbours, to break bread together, to reflect upon our blessings and the people in our lives and those whose memories we cherish. We're so lucky to have families that love us, communities that support us, and a province and country that has room in its heart for us all. Let's toast to the good in our lives and always be conscious of what we can do to lift up those less fortunate than ourselves. I wish all a happy Thanksgiving. Je souhaite à tous un très heureux Action de grâce. Merci.
Well said. The member from Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, today I would like to take this opportunity to thank our Fisherman's Cove Development Association for their continued support of our community. On September 17th, the association held their annual Fantastic Golf fundraiser at the Heartland Point Forces Golf Club. Most recently, the association hosted a Meet Your Farmer public event on Saturday, September the 29th. This event included entertainment for the entire family, starting with a free breakfast, informative vendors, and a whole bunch of animals, including a milking cow. As we look forward to future events, we thank you for being an interactive and valuable part of our community. I ask all members of this House to join me in acknowledging the Fisherman's Cove Development Association for all of their hard work and continued dedication. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to acknowledge the outstanding medical service that Dr. Robert Scoville has provided to the Timberley and surrounding communities over many years. Dr. Scoville is a knowledgeable, experienced physician who regularly extends himself above and beyond reasonable measures of patient care. He is an attentive and perceptive listener. His patients appreciate the personal, matter-of-fact way he describes complex medical conditions in plain English and provides encouraging and motivating advice. Dr. Scoville finds the time to visit his patients in the hospital even after he has referred them to specialists and they are under the specialist care. He even stops in to visit the family members of his patients who are in the hospital. Dr. Scoville personally returns calls for urgent matters and makes house calls on his way home after a long day's work when aging patients or parents with sick kids have no transportation to come to his office. It is no wonder why a new doctor, as well as a new nurse practitioner, has recently decided to work alongside Dr. Scoville. Please join me in welcoming the addition of primary health care providers in Timberley and express our gratitude to Dr. Scoville for his service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Terry Fox Run has taken place in many communities already, and I'm sure all members did what they could to support the event in their communities. I would like to briefly talk about a man in our own constituency, Wayne Wolfett, who over the past 11 years has raised over $50,000 for cancer research. Receiving the CTV Volunteer of the Week tribute on Live at 5 in 2014, he has been a phenomenal support to the Brookfield Area Terry Fox Committee and has continued this year. I wish to express my thanks to Mr. Wolfett and all the volunteers like him who give so selfishly of their time and energy. And Mr. Speaker, I wish everyone a very meaningful Thanksgiving with their family and friends.
The honourable member for Sydney Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this World Teachers' Day, I rise to recognize my wife, Stephanie Kennedy, and all the teachers in the Cape Breton Centre for Education. Each and every day, they work extremely hard to support youth in our community. Not only are they doing that work in the classroom, but they are also role models in the community in various organizations. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise my place to recognize my wife, Stephanie, for the work that she does and all of her colleagues for supporting students at home and in the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate members of Queens County Transit who have recently launched a transportation system in Queens to assist senior and low-income residents with door-to-door transportation to appointments, shopping, educational and recreational activities, thereby improving access to essential services and reducing loneliness and isolation. Mr. Speaker, the committed volunteers of Queens County Transit Society are to be congratulated on successfully bringing this transportation project into reality. We thank them for their hard work and diligence, bringing much-needed services and support to enable residents to lead healthy, happy, and fulfilling lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I just want to remind people that there's some chatter going on in the chamber. It's getting hard to hear members, so I ask that we keep it to a dull roar. Thank you. The member from Fairview Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this World Teachers' Day, I'd like to take less than a minute to reflect on all of the amazing teachers that I've had the opportunity to learn from, work with, and consider friends throughout the years. And in particular, I would like to mention two teachers who I had in high school who really shaped the person that I have become. Mr. Church, who was my high school English grade 11 teacher, who challenged me to disagree with his positions, and it was okay to not to have a different opinion as long as I could argue it positively. And Margaret Young, who was the director of our high school musicals, who unfortunately passed away in my grade 12 year, who always taught me and all of the kids that she came across to take risks, to be leaders, and to always have faith in themselves. So on this World Teachers' Day, I'd like to thank all of the teachers, but in particular Mr. Church and Miss Young. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the former L'Auberge Acadienne Inn in Arishat has been given a new lease on life and has been renamed the Clarestone Inn. The Clarestone Inn is a unique hotel-motel offering the best in French Acadian and Cape Breton hospitality, with the bonus of a spectacular view of Chedabucto Bay. The 17-unit Clarestone was purchased by former Arishat resident Shauna Landry, who felt it was an opportune time to return to her roots, having lived in Halifax for the past number of years. The inn was opened in June and is expected to contribute to the economic growth of our region. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Landry is making her mark on the community, and I wish her every success in her new business venture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would draw the attention of the House to the East Gallery, where we're joined today by Professor Chad Warren and Dr. Ina Vereskova, two professors from the Political Science Department, and they're joined here by a group of students from Acadia University that are joining us here this morning to see democracy in action in this beautiful legislature that we call home. I'd ask all members of the House of Assembly to give them a warm welcome.
The honourable member for Kings South.
Mr. Speaker, it's a great accomplishment when volunteers visibly improve the lives of hundreds of people. Developed in 1982, the SMILE program at Acadia University in Wolfville has achieved this consistently for 35 years. SMILE is an innovative, volunteer-driven program that provides persons with disabilities a unique physical activity experience. Programming is delivered 4 times per week over the course of 16 weeks. In 2017, more than 280 participants ages 3 to 53 were enrolled in SMILE, with over 400 student volunteers from diverse university departments engaged in program delivery. Dr. Roxanne Seaman has led the program for the last 16 years with exceptional commitment to excellence. Her leadership has guided hundreds of undergraduate student volunteers each year. I invite all members to join me today in recognizing Dr. Roxanne Seaman and the hundreds of Acadia student volunteers that allow this wonderful program to thrive in Wolfville. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend the Judic Volunteer Fire Department will be celebrating their 50th anniversary. Let us thank all of the members, past and present, for their generosity and love of neighbour. The many hours of training, the acceptance of entering risky situations and encountering personal harm, the openness to see and experience things they would not want to see or feel, all to help others in their time of need. Congratulations to the Judic Volunteer Fire Department on 50 years of service. We here in the Nova Scotia Legislature thank you and share our applause.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to join so many of my colleagues in this House in acknowledging and thanking the thousands of dedicated teachers across Nova Scotia. Starting with Mrs. George, my grade 1 teacher at the Guysborough Academy, I benefited from the mentoring and teaching by an amazing group of teachers, ending with Mr. Rose, my history teacher at Prince Andrew High School in Dartmouth. Prince Andrew is a school noted for sending many alumni to government, including Mayor Mike Savage of HRM and Dartmouth Member of Parliament Darren Fisher. Of course, Prince Andrew has also provided a distinguished former teacher, our member from Dartmouth East. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in thanking our dedicated teachers, past and present, for their commitment to advancing the cause of education for our youth in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queen Shelburne on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, can I beg leave to make an introduction? If I could bring the members' attention to the West Gallery, I would like to welcome Kenny Edwards to the Legislature today. Kenny is from Bridgewater and has been a denturist in Bridgewater for quite some time. And actually, the first time I was ever in the Legislature as a student, Kenny was up here representing the denturists in Nova Scotia. So if I could ask the members to give Kenny the warm welcome of the House today.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, may I beg to make an introduction?
Permission granted.
I'd like to welcome Veer Gandhi here with us today. He is a student from Dalhousie University and is originally from Tanzania. I'd like to welcome him here to the House today.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, today I also would like to honour World Teachers Day. Teachers are the best, and also did a lot of consulting in vocational training. My friend, Mr. Scott Armstrong, who is an award-winning PhD scholar. Scott is a former Member of Parliament and is currently principal in our school system. I'd also like to honour my dear friends Kathy and Steve Wells. Kathy is an amazing, top-notch, dedicated school principal at Cumberland North Academy in Brookdale, and her husband is also an amazing school administrator at Cyrus Eaton Elementary School in Pugwash. Today, I ask my colleagues here in the House to honour all teachers on this World Teachers' Day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just before we go on to question period, I'd like to acknowledge my own teacher on World Teachers' Day. My mother taught in the Dartmouth school system in the 1960s. And certainly was a big influence on me. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. We started this session talking about the terrible circumstances of a young survivor of sexual assault who did not receive service at the Colchester East Hants Health Centre. The facility actually lacked a full-time SANE nurse who would have been trained to help this young woman. On November 1st, 2017, the Antigonish Women's Resource Centre and Sexual Assault Services Association sent a letter requesting that their services be extended to cover the Colchester East Hants Health Centre, and I can table that letter. The response to the letter didn't occur until last month. So can the Premier explain why it took 10 months for his government to follow up on this letter?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I want to assure her, Mr. Speaker, as has been the custom across this province, we continue to ensure that we continue to roll out the SANE program in communities across the province. Particular hospital she refers to, the Women's Centre from Antigonish and Truro, met with the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker. They've also been in contact with the Minister of Health. We're looking forward to continuing to work with them so that that program will be rolled out not only in that community, but we'll continue to roll it out across the province.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. According to the letter, the Colchester and Cumberland region has demonstrated a need for a SANE program, citing over 70,000 people. A proposal was costed out by the Antigonish Women's Resource Centre in consultation with Central Nova Women's Resource Centre, Colchester East Hants Health Centre, Colchester Sexual Assault Centre, Truro Police Service, Colchester RCMP, Department of Justice Victim Services, and the total cost of this program is $93,000 within an overall health budget of over, $4 billion? Almost a year later, a couple of awful stories and a community outcry, the government has finally decided the area needs a SANE nurse. So I'd like to know what changed to force this government to finally do the right thing.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to tell the Honourable Member we committed to this program rolling out across the province. She would know, Mr. Speaker, there are communities that currently have a SANE nurse that's working in that community. She would also know that we have opportunities, and more recently it was in Yarmouth. It was announced there's a position in the Valley that we're continuing to work with. As you would know, it would take a period of time to train for that specific specialty, Mr. Speaker. I want to assure the Honourable Member those community organizations that have reached out to our government continue to receive an open door. We'll continue to work with them, provide this service across the province. Again, I want to reiterate the Deputy Premier has met with this organization. She has met with the Minister of Health. The Minister of Health has also met with these organizations. We'll continue to make sure that we provide this service in communities across our province.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate what the Premier is saying, but it's about time and how long it takes. So 2 years ago, this government promised a SANE nurse for Cape Breton. That was an announcement that the government has failed to fulfill after 2 years. So now, amidst community outcry, this government has promised a much-needed SANE nurse for Colchester, which is fabulous, and it's great that they're making this announcement. But can the minister tell the House how long will it take to train and fill the SANE nurse position in Colchester County?
The Honourable Premier.
Are you asking me or the minister? Me or the minister? Oh, thanks. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to make sure, Mr. Speaker, to roll out this program across the province. I believe she referred to Cape Breton. That position has been filled, is my understanding. Continue the one in Yarmouth. There's one in Yarmouth. We'll continue to roll out, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we provide this service to women.
Please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to assure all those residents of Truro, Mr. Speaker, that the Deputy Premier is speaking very loud and clear for those women across that region, and we'll make sure that they have that service.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
21 years ago, a Liberal government stood where this government stands now and proudly announced a new mega infrastructure project by which all new schools would be built on a P3 model. Every argument we're familiar with was brought forward, including the argument that it was going to be more cost-effective. 2 years later, the government commissioned a study to look at the construction program, and that study found no evidence of any economic advantage at all. And by the time it came to pay the piper 20 years later, we had to pay $228 million in order to buy our own schools back. I want to ask the Premier, does the Liberal Party not learn from its own mistakes?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to take this opportunity to thank all those healthcare professionals, Mr. Speaker, who have been excited for the last 24 hours about the announcement of moving forward. I want to tell the honourable member this is a generational opportunity we have to reshape the delivery model of delivering health care in our capital region and across, quite frankly, across our province. I'm very proud of the work that has taken place in the traditional build in the Dartmouth General. We'll continue to see that work. Hopefully it'll be finished and opened next year, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing the work that's happening around the hospice, where communities have rallied in supporting to build that. We're doing work in the third and fifth floor at the HI site, Mr. Speaker. But we know there's a much bigger project that's required, and we've reached out, Mr. Speaker, to the private sector. We've gone out to Deloitte, who's overlaid both the traditional build or a P3 model. We believe the P3 model is the appropriate way for us to continue to move forward to ensure that Nova Scotians get the health care they deserve, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
We know now how this is going to go. Companies and firms and consortiums are going to line up to submit proposals for this contract, and then one of them is going to be selected, and on the day that selection's announced, there's going to be great rejoicing in the halls of that firm, because there is a lot of money to be made on a $2 billion project. That's money that could have been used for nursing homes, for nurses, for CCAs, for doctors, for paramedics. How can the Premier possibly argue that the P3 approach is more cost-effective when a P3 project, unlike a traditional delivery mode, must always, by definition, make room for the profit of the proponent?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, this province has never embarked on this ambitious of an agenda when it comes to transforming, Mr. Speaker, the Atlantic Canada's regional hospital to make it plain and simple, Mr. Speaker. We need to ensure that we have the expertise to ensure that we can deliver this project. I also want to remind the honourable member he continues to talk about those traditional builds. Mr. Speaker, there are time after time after time, Mr. Speaker. Look at the Truro Hospital. A Conservative government announced it was going to cost $90 million to build, Mr. Speaker. It was $180 million before we were finished, Mr. Speaker. So they talk about cost overruns. What the P3 model will give us, Mr. Speaker, is certainty. And we'll continue to make sure, and at the end of that 30 years, Mr. Speaker, we will own that building, and it will be in the same shape it was the day we opened it.
Oh, yeah. The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Back at that time, 21 years ago, when the Liberal government entered into their P3 school experiment, the decision was justified on the basis of a consultant's report. And the government of that time had enough respect for the public that they brought that report and tabled it before the House. The government now tells the people that there is a consultant's report that establishes that the P3 model is a more cost-effective way to go. The only thing is that no one is allowed, in fact, to see it. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier indeed has evidence that contradicts our experience in Nova Scotia of the last 21 years, will he have enough respect for the members of the public in Nova Scotia to produce it?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we'll be happy to show that document, Mr. Speaker, after we go through the process of negotiating a contract, Mr. Speaker. It would be inappropriate, Mr. Speaker, for us to lay what we believe the cost of that out to private sector individuals who will work to our number, Mr. Speaker, as opposed to giving us what is the appropriate number to build that hospital, Mr. Speaker. No wonder when that party was in power, Mr. Speaker, they drove this province into fiscal disaster, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to build our province forward in financial health, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to ensure that we build the appropriate infrastructure in the appropriate way so that Nova Scotians get the infrastructure they deserve, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. Yesterday, the Premier committed to tabling a letter from Chief Justice MacDonald resigning as Chair of the Chief Judge Appointment Advisory Committee. For the benefit of all members, the Chief Judge Appointment Advisory Committee is made up of lawyers, judges, and members of the public. As that letter was not tabled, I believe it must not have come to the Premier's office. So, did the Minister of Justice receive a letter from Chief Justice MacDonald resigning as Chair? And if he did, will he table it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did, in fact, receive correspondence from the Chief Justice of the Nova Scotia Supreme Court. The Chief Justice clearly labelled that document as confidential, Mr. Speaker, and I respect the piece of correspondence that Chief Justice MacDonald authored. I don't believe that it would be appropriate, Mr. Speaker, to breach that confidence and respect.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, and I want to thank the Minister for his comments, but it seems to me that the Chief Justice resigning as Chair of this important committee is very unusual, and there seems to be some secrecy around it, and I'm sure that the Attorney General of the province, who oversees the legal services in Nova Scotia, would investigate why the Chief Justice would take such an unusual step that we've not normally have ever seen. So I appreciate confidentiality, as you indicated, but I think that Nova Scotians deserve to know why. So I'm wondering if you will table again the letter that you received.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's appropriate to recognize and acknowledge the leadership of Chief Justice MacDonald and the role that the judiciary are playing in today's society, much different than 25 or 30 years ago when I was first exposed to the system. Mr. Speaker, the correspondence that Chief Justice MacDonald has authored was labelled confidential. That piece of correspondence, Mr. Speaker, is protected under the FOIPOC Act, Section 4.2 I believe. I have to respect the desire of the Chief Justice when he labelled that document confidential.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Yesterday, during the update on the QE2, government representatives said that the plan for the new hospital includes 36 additional inpatient beds. Now, a person might fairly wonder if the need for these beds stems from the fact that 20% of our hospital beds are filled with people waiting for places in nursing homes. We also know that a nursing home bed costs only about $250 a day in comparison with a hospital bed costing around $1,300. In the midst of all this redevelopment, what does the Premier say to all those who must continue to live in hospitals because the government has failed to open an adequate number of nursing home beds across the province?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, as he would know, the announcement yesterday is bringing together 2 healthcare facilities on the peninsula to ensure that we modernize that infrastructure. There is a number of those beds that would be there associated with the capacity to do more work. There's also, you'll see an expansion in and around that facility, Mr. Speaker, and around making sure we take advantage of new technologies that'll be there. Dr. Bethune called it a game changer when it came to cancer care in this province, Mr. Speaker. It's a positive announcement. We'll continue to work with our partners, though, in the private sector, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we continue to make sure that we provide long-term care beds across the province.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Well, there is so much evidence that our hospitals' emergency rooms around the province are being backed up by the high proportion of people there in the category of alternate level of care. Just yesterday, the Health Authority's Chief Nursing Officer said that the Valley Regional is challenged by the volume of people waiting in hospital for long-term care placement there. 22 of their 138 beds are occupied by people in the long-term care placement process. So I want to ask the Premier, when can we expect to see a program of nursing home construction adequate to move the province's seniors out of hospitals into appropriate care?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if he believes that we should allow the private sector to continue to invest in long-term care beds, Mr. Speaker. He's opposed to it in primary care. Fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we've announced an additional 100 long-term care beds in Cape Breton. when the redevelopment that'll take place, that's doubling what's currently there. I think it's 50 that'll be added to that. We know there's some other need in that particular region. We're looking at what is the best option for that. As we look around the province, we're looking at capacity within our current systems, so ways to expand some of those footprints, or is indeed another way to provide the care. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, we're hearing from families across this province who want to continue to remain in their home as long as possible. We're making investments in adapting homes for care. At the same time, we're ensuring that we invest in home care so that we continue to meet the wishes and needs of our citizens.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier and his role as Minister responsible for youth. In question period, the Premier often references statistics having to do with young people in our province. However, there is one that he never seems to include. The Premier never mentions that this government has allowed the Youth Secretariat to virtually disappear over his mandate. There's no record of this important body, in fact, since 2014-2015. Why has the minister responsible for the Youth Secretariat failed to staff and empower this important advisory body for so many years?
The Honourable Premier.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question. It's an important question as we continue to make sure that youth see themselves in this great province, Mr. Speaker. We continue to see youth unemployment decline, Mr. Speaker. We continue to see more young people choose to live and work in this province. Mr. Speaker, we continue to reach out to those youth who've gone beyond our borders, Mr. Speaker, to find out how can we support them to bring them back home, continuing to work with them. And as far as the Youth Secretary goes, Mr. Speaker, we're continuing to find new avenues and new ways to ensure that young people's voices are being heard inside of this government, Mr. Speaker, and in the province.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, in my duties as a member of the Human Resources Committee, I've learned that the Youth Advisory Council was discontinued by this government 4 years ago and replaced with the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development's Advisory Committee on Student Issues. Under the terms of reference for the Committee on Student Issues, 12 to 15 youth are supposed to be appointed by the Minister, and yet there is no record of anyone ever being appointed in the last 4 years. Included in the terms of reference is the requirement that the committee be comprised of at least one African Nova Scotian youth, one Mi'kmaq youth, and one youth with a disability. Is the minister not aware that he has failed to fulfill his responsibility to appoint young people to the minister's advisory committee on student issues?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, that student advisory committee has been appointed. I met with him at the end of last school year, and we actually have a meeting that's being scheduled for this fall.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Renewal. On Tuesday, a tender went out to pave the Lower Porter Road, and I will table that. This road is used to detour those people that would normally use the bridge on Trunk 2 that was removed this past summer. Residents in the area welcome this paving job and thank the minister for that, but they are worried that this is a long-term fix to replace the bridge. Can the minister reassure the people of Cumberland County that the paving of Lower Porter Road is necessary maintenance to build up to the new bridge and not a long-term fix for this roundabout?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member opposite for the question. I would say that prior to the advent of the member into the legislature, we spent a lot of time talking about the road in question. There was a tremendous amount of requests that came in to do something about that road. The department responded. It is doing what should be done, because that road is important too, after the bridge is being replaced. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister for the response, as he has recognized that this is an important venture. The Rainbow Bridge was closed last winter and removed this past summer. The bridge is a vital link for Cumberland County that allows safe traffic and efficient passage from Amherst to the majority of Cumberland South. Earlier in this session, I did question what was posed about the progress and specific design timing of the new bridge. With next year's budget workings beginning, can the minister update the House on the amount of money that's being set aside for this Rainbow Bridge, and will it be completed in 2019-20 construction season?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member opposite for the question. The department has the care and control for over 4,200 bridge structures in the province. And annually, because of the aging of the infrastructure, many of them come forward for replacement. In this particular instance, this bridge is just about ready to come out of the design process. I don't have the amount that it might cost at this point in time, but it certainly is a priority for the department. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester-Musquedobbin Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Service Nova Scotia. Service Nova Scotia currently offers many of the services online, such as vital statistics, motor vehicle, many business-related services. Payments to the International Fuel Tax Agreement Unit of Service Nova Scotia, however, requires payment via cheque or credit card information sent by fax. A constituent operating a transport company does not use a fax machine or cheques for her business and therefore struggles each quarter to make her payments. Can the minister look into having payments made to IFTA update to include online payments?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. It is an important one, and it's one that it's really about the inner workings of government, and every government across the country is dealing with the same thing, although not as aggressive as Nova Scotia is. Access Nova Scotia is the face of our government, really, and it's the touch point for many Nova Scotians. But yet, as my colleague, who is now the Minister of Justice, says, it's a digital age, and we operate an analog government, and that's where we're at. It's hard to fathom that we can't accept payments online by way of any of the online e-commerce mechanisms, and we're resorting to checks and cash in some cases. So, Mr. Speaker, we've committed to a digital transformation that'll be incredibly a large investment on behalf of Nova Scotians that will completely transform all of our registries and all of Access Nova Scotia. We'll get there soon.
The honourable member for Colchester-Musquedobbin Valley.
All right. I know this kind of an issue seems minor in the grand scheme of things, but a lot of the concerns that come through my office have to do with people just trying to maneuver through the system. And I know the minister has been looking at reducing the red tape and making this province more business friendly. So the question, can the minister update this House on whether there are other business transactions that do require faxes and checks as opposed to modern online transactions?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the answer is yes. With the 4 registries, land registries, vital stats, joint stocks, all of our birth certificates, and all of the functions and services that are offered by Access Nova Scotia vis-a-vis the Service Nova Scotia programs, there still is antiquated mechanisms whereby a digital payment isn't possible. So again, that's something. It's at the forefront of our planning for the digital government and the digital transformation. Again, it'll be tens of millions of dollars to implement, and it'll take a number of years to design. And I know that the member would feel this from his constituents. The land registry system is one example that is extremely antiquated. We've got to make government more accessible by online means, and we're certainly endeavouring to do that. Thanks.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. In the spring of 2017, the government announced it had paid $7.5 million for 15 acres of land in Bayers Lake Park for a site of a new outpatient centre. The government paid more than 10 times the assessed value of at that time, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, the government already owned the land around the Cobequid Centre, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Premier, can the Premier explain why his government thought it was in the public interest to overpay for a piece of private land rather than expanding the Cobequid Health Centre?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. The piece of property that we bought in Bayers Lake, Mr. Speaker, is one that would be completely pad ready, all the services provided, the roads added to it, all of the things that would allow us to start building on it. But to his point, for his constituents, Mr. Speaker, the Cobequid was part of the conversation about when we looked at the redevelopment of delivering health services in the capital region. The reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, with the population growth that we've seen in and around the Clayton Park and the Timberley prospect, it was deemed that it would be more appropriate, Mr. Speaker, to spread those services out and provide some of those in that particular community where we've seen a tremendous growth in residential communities.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The interesting thing, some 17 years ago, the former government, Progressive Conservative government, was looking at replacing the Cobequid Centre. They were in the same position. They were looking at trying to move that and buy a piece of land. But they realized if they owned land, it was probably most appropriate to keep as much money as possible delivering frontline health care. The Cobequid Centre was meant to be built onto, upwards, and there's access to the highways all around, Mr. Speaker. It's an amazing facility. I want to ask the Premier, will he ensure that with the $2 billion+ being potentially spent for the redevelopment of the QE2, that the Cobequid Centre has a fair shake and we see improved access to care there as we move forward?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud of the work that our healthcare providers are doing at the Cobequid Centre, Mr. Speaker, provide services to those of us who live outside of HRM. Mr. Speaker, my family has gone into that particular facility. We continue to enhance that work that is there. Grateful for the community that continues to embrace the Cobequid Centre. When we looked at the overall footprint, though, about delivering health care across the province and this opportunity that we had before us, it was continue to look at what the Cobequid Centre had. How do we look at what's happening in the Dartmouth side and Dartmouth General? At the same time, when we saw traffic patterns and the growth of residential populations, Mr. Speaker, it made more sense that we continue to ensure that the Cobequid Centre will be there for generations to come, and we continue to improve services at that facility. At the same time, we build this primary care outpatients clinic where we see that growth, and the 103 is coming in, and we're seeing a tremendous growth in the people who are moving in Halifax.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, last April 2017, the people of Pugwash were happy to host the Premier in our community, and he made an announcement that the local hospital would be replaced. With the local mining industry, agricultural industry, and the seasonal population growth that triples, there certainly is a need for a new facility that includes diagnostic imaging, lab services, urgent care services, and observation beds. Would the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal be willing to update the construction plans today for the North Cumberland Memorial Hospital and also ensure that there is a public update for the community?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member opposite for the question. I'll undertake to bring you some current information on that project. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Thank you to the Minister. Of course, the people of Pugwash and area are worried that they may have fallen prey to politics. A new facility has been promised, often strategically, right before elections on a few occasions, but they have yet to see a new facility, a new hospital. Will the Minister of Health guarantee the people of Pugwash and area that the latest announcement was more than an empty election promise and that we will see groundbreaking soon and not just before the next provincial election?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, I was actually in that community making that announcement. We'll continue to keep our commitments to that particular community as we will to the entire region of Cumberland, Mr. Speaker. I had the good fortune, Mr. Speaker, of entering the healthcare system this summer through the hospital in Cumberland, Mr. Speaker, and the service that I received in that facility was top-notch, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the Honourable Member who held a political rally on the front lawn of that, and the only way you could actually get to speak at that is if you had a Tory card membership. Fact of the matter is, we're working with the people of that community to continue to ensure that they have healthcare services, Mr. Speaker, that they deserve.
The Honourable Member, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Everyone in Nova Scotia now knows that the installation of a new effluent treatment facility for Northern Pulp waste should have been a Class 2, not a Class 1. However, the cleanup of those exact same toxins in Boat Harbour will require a Class 2. Even with only a Class 1 assessment, we are still behind the 8 ball because there has yet to be an application filed by Northern Pulp. Pictou Harbour freezes in the winter. Sometimes the ice doesn't go away until May. That limits the number of days that workers can install the pipe. By what date does the Premier believe Northern Pulp must commence the installation of a pipe into the Northumberland Strait in order to meet the 2020 deadline of the closure of Boat Harbour?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Our government made a commitment to the First Nations community, Mr. Speaker, that we would keep our commitment of cleaning up Boat Harbour. We will keep that timeline, Mr. Speaker. Quite frankly, that the Boat Harbour has been cited next to the Aboriginal community for no other reason, Mr. Speaker, than it was next to an Aboriginal community that has been ignored by successive governments. We are not going to allow that to continue to happen. We're going to make sure we clean up Boat Harbour to ensure that we continue to work with that community. As far as, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Northern Pulp, it is a private entity. It will have to meet the obligations. It will have to go through the commitment of ensuring, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that it meets the environmental obligations to this province. They'll determine when they put it in, but let me tell you, we are keeping our commitment to closing Boat Harbour.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
My question wasn't really about Boat Harbour. It was about what timeline to install the pipe. And we all know this is a very delicate issue for not just Pictou County, for all of Nova Scotia. We know that there are thousands and thousands of jobs on both sides of the issue. And I realize the challenge of jobs over environment, environment over jobs, and jobs over jobs in this situation, because we have two different industries at odds, and they both matter. I understand that the government is confident in the timeline. The Minister of Transportation says it will be installed, but we've reached a point, Mr. Speaker, in the calendar where prudent planning would insist that there should be a contingency plan. So in the event that the Strait Pipe is not operational by January 31st, 2020, when Boat Harbour closes, has the Premier come up with any type of contingency plan and worked with Northern Pulp to ensure that they continue operation?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Northern Pulp will make a decision, Mr. Speaker, about the viability of their about that mill. They'll continue to go through the process. We know we have an obligation, Mr. Speaker. We're closing the Boat Harbour 10 years earlier, Mr. Speaker. There's a liability on our side. We'll continue to make that forward, Mr. Speaker. But she should go to the Board of Directors of Northern Pulp, Mr. Speaker, and ask one of them when they're going to put it in.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, a question for the Minister of Transportation. When discussing Route 19 access at the Port Hastings Rotary, the Minister stated how important the golf courses are to the economy in Inverness. And Mr. Speaker, we are certainly in agreement on that. I think about Route 19 through Strathlorne, approaching Inverness and from the south. And I think about how important this road is, the traffic volumes for people who are accessing those courses, and all of the other tourism assets we find in Inverness County. Would the Minister agree that while this section is on the capital plan, it should be moved up so that it is paved next summer?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I reflect back on the importance of Route 19 and the wonderful county of Inverness, how important it is to the mosaic of Nova Scotia, I think back to a previous Conservative government many years ago when the Honourable Fisher Hudson was the member for Victoria, and the discussion was abounded around where the Cabot Trail should actually be located. And the decision was taken at that point in time to move the Cabot Trail out of Inverness and have it coming out at the intersection of 104 at Middle River. So in terms of, despite receiving that probably bad news for the people in that area, Route 19 remains very important. We have an ambitious plan for repaving in the area, and we will continue with that plan, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, if the Minister would see to it that it be repaved next summer, I may be able to point him in the direction of some moonshine. And I would ensure, Mr. Speaker, that it would fall within the amounts of the Conflict of Interest Act. And while I've never witnessed its production, I did see it coming out of a trunk at a dance in Glencoe Mills a number of years ago, and a gentleman shared with me, he compared it to homemade cheese. He said it had much more taste than that which you find in the store. So I don't know if it's appropriate, Mr. Speaker, but if the Minister would take that into account, the traffic volumes on the road, the fact that there's joints on the road from the last time it was paved, and not those kinds of joints, but actual joints when it was paved that were left there that shouldn't have been. would the minister consider these points and consider moving up that paving for next summer?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank Member Opposite for the question. And there was a time I would have taken him up on the invitation for his imbibements there, but I'm not in that league anymore. All the roads in that area are important. I would suggest to the member that he take advantage of the consultation that we're currently in now with the department, talking to all members of the House as to what their priorities might be for the upcoming year before we set the budget. We listen intently to that, you know, we've got the paving program. We also have the gravel road program, and the members are very important to influencing where that money is spent. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Yesterday, during his announcement about the new hospital in Halifax, the Premier said that the QE2 Foundation wouldn't be alone in fundraising to chip into the cost of the redevelopment. In fact, he said that all the regional hospital foundations are working together to raise money to support the new QE2. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier confirm that Cape Bretoners are being asked to raise money to fund the hospital in Halifax while their own hospitals are being permanently closed?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. What I said, Mr. Speaker, is that it is not just up to the foundation here in Halifax. It will require all Nova Scotians and Atlantic Canadians to ensure that we have a world-class tertiary care centre here in Halifax to provide the services not only to the citizens of this great province, but indeed the region. There are people coming into this province every day to get care. We're going to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we provide them the appropriate infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, so that the great healthcare professionals that we have can continue to deliver the high-quality care they've been doing.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think Cape Bretoners would mind fundraising if they could guarantee that they would have the services they need in their own communities and knew their donations weren't simply subsidizing the profits for the private corporations. Right now, families in Cape Breton are forced to send their children hundreds of kilometres away for mental health services, and we're still without the doctors we need. And Cape Bretoners are only too happy to fundraise, but we'd like to keep our money in our communities for our own hospitals. Mr. Speaker, can the Premier clarify why he can find money for profits for the private sector, but can't find money to keep services available to Cape Bretoners?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. She should have heard at the announcement, Mr. Speaker. We continue to make investment in the regional hospital in Cape Breton, continue to provide and enhance the cancer care on the island, Mr. Speaker, continue to improve and widen it, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member is talking about New Waterford, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that hospital needs to be replaced, Mr. Speaker. Only the NDP would believe that we should replace it with something that was built 60 years ago and not modernize the healthcare facilities to deliver to our students and province, Mr. Speaker. The reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, we're making major investments in Cape Breton Island. Mr. Speaker, we're grateful for those Cape Bretoners who continue to work with us so that we can provide them the care.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, family doctors use their repeated contracts with patients to build on the patient-doctor relationship and ensure continuity of care. Patients then have the peace of mind that in their time of sickness, there's somebody they can see and trust who can both advocate and navigate them through the system. You can imagine, Mr. Speaker, the stress that one of my constituents felt when she read in the Cape Breton Post that her family doctor was closing her practice. The number of people in my constituents without a family doctor is growing, and all the assurances we hear from the government is doing nothing to address this issue. So my question to the Minister is he satisfied with the status quo that patients who have a family doctor receive better care as those who rely on walk-in clinics or emergency rooms for their care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it interesting the member suggests that this is a government relying on the status quo. Mr. Speaker, I remind the member and all members of this legislature that, in fact, we listen to the frontline healthcare workers and the clinicians, provide the care, and provide advice into how to revamp and revitalize healthcare delivery of services throughout the province. Mr. Speaker, we had a huge announcement just yesterday on the next progress with the QE2 redevelopment, Mr. Speaker, for all Nova Scotians. We're investing in infrastructure in Cape Breton. And Mr. Speaker, we're changing the way we provide compensation and work with our incentives and technology for frontline healthcare workers as well. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to the next generation of healthcare for all Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the exact people he said they consulted with, Mr. Speaker, was on a talk show and a radio show in Cape Breton that said she wasn't consulted, although he said they were, or the minister said they were. I've been getting a lot of calls in my constituency office the last few days from constituents angry with the recent reports of excessive indulgences of the Healthcare Authority. They're outraged that over $8,000 was spent on a Christmas party. They're disgusted that a farewell party for 35 people cost over $800, and they're floored when they hear about a senior executive dinner costing taxpayers over $300. I'm glad there are new policies in place to address this issue, but these situations show a severe lack of judgment and disregard for the constituents' taxpayers' money. My question to the Minister of Health, will you stand up and accept responsibility and apologise to the many Nova Scotians who have been left behind by this government's constant mismanagement of our healthcare system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As previously advised, indeed, both government and the executive of the Health Authority recognized the information brought forward by the Auditor General, as well as his recommendations. Mr. Speaker, took the steps to update and enhance the controls, clarify the policies with respect to hospitality, Mr. Speaker. Those steps have been taken, and those are the results, I think, that Nova Scotians would expect in how the government should respond when the Auditor General makes recommendations.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My first question is to the Minister of Health. The wonderful teachers in our schools are expected to do much more than teach. We are now asking them increasingly to be healthcare providers as well. Until very recently, there was only one resource nurse for all of our 136 schools in HRM. Even with the second nurse recently added, there is a 1 to 2 month lag between when a nurse is called in by a teacher or EPA and she can actually show up at the school to help. These are needs that the students have that the teachers are now being required to provide. Does the Minister of Health believe that it is acceptable for students to wait for 1 to 2 months for their teacher or EPA to learn how to manage tube feeding and other medical needs?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We recognize the challenge that our frontline teachers have faced with the lack of supports. That's why we have moved in a direction working with the Department of Health to provide wraparound services in our schools. We've done that through Schools Plus program, which links our students to a variety of supports within all government departments, whether it's health, justice, community services, or any other departments where that might work. Mr. Speaker, we're in the process of bringing in new nurses into the system with the help of the Health Authority. We'll have 4 new nurses to help us prepare for these particular cases that the member has brought up. We're also bringing in child and youth care practitioners, autism supports, behavioral supports, Mr. Speaker, and we know we have a lot more work to do, and we're not going to stop till those kids get the service that they need.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although the Minister of Health has changed his look, the problem with the system as it stands is the EPAs in our schools do not, in fact, get any real significant training, and so they're being required to do a lot of healthcare provision. So these resource nurses teach EPAs and teachers how to care for students, which includes catheterization, feeding tubes, wheelchair transfers to toileting, ventilators, insulin pumps, just to name the few complex healthcare skills that it takes nurses, physiotherapists to 6 years to learn how to do. My question to the Minister of Education then, on World Teachers Day, does he accept that families, teachers, EPAs are not getting the proper training that they need, and that is it acceptable for them to wait 1 to 2 months, and will he commit to doubling the number of nurses in our school system?
Just before we move over to the Minister, remind the Honourable Member it's the prerogative of government to determine who answers the question. The Honourable Minister of Education. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In fact, we have enhanced some of these services. We heard loud and clearly through the Commission on Inclusive Education's reporting that 2/3 of our teachers
told us they did not feel adequately prepared to handle the complexities of the classroom and that there was not adequate supports, non-teaching supports to assist them in delivering their work, which is why we have hired more nurses, Mr. Speaker. We've also put a lot of money into professional development and training to help all of our professionals in the education system in terms of supporting them and doing better for our kids, Mr. Speaker. And I'll table all the inclusive education supports that we have brought in, and I'll remind the member that her and her party did vote against all these when it came budget time.
The honourable member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to ask this to the Minister of Health, but I noticed that the Premier answered the member from Sackville-Cobequid, so I'm going to address this to the Premier, and hopefully he'll answer this for me as well. The long-awaited QE2 development plan yesterday, 30 to 50-year plan. Cobequid not even mentioned in that plan. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Premier, numerous times I've stood up here over the past year politely bringing issues around Cobequid, very patiently waiting for answers to see the QE2 redevelopment plan, and I'm disappointed that the Cobequid Community Health Centre is not mentioned in the future developments of this plan. My question is, Mr. Premier, why is Cobequid Community Health Plan not even mentioned as part of the redevelopment of the QE2 complex for the next 30 to 50 years?
Just remind the honourable member to keep his questions directed through the chair. The honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to welcome him to the party late. As I responded to the honourable member, from Sackville-Cobequid, Mr. Speaker, it was part of ongoing look at how do we redistribute the capital plan in greater HRM. We looked at where population growth is. I want to assure the honourable member, as I did to his colleague from the neighbouring constituency, that the Cobequid Centre is an important part of delivering primary health care across our region. Many people from my constituency across the valley continue to come in. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we announced where we would be moving services that were now currently at the QE2, Mr. Speaker. We didn't mention all of the hospitals in the province. We mentioned those that would be impacted directly by these changes. But I want to assure the honourable member that the Cobequid Centre is an important part of delivering primary care to our citizens, and we'll continue to make those investments when required.
The honourable member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Premier. This through to the Minister of Health. So Sackville-Beaverbank area is one of the fastest growing areas. I've mentioned numerous times my concerns. Now with this 30 to 50-year plan, those concerns are even higher. And I will say, I'm at the party, but obviously I'm the wallflower, okay? So I've noted many times clinic hours at Cobequid are limited. They're only from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. for services. ER is only open from 7 to midnight. People in Sackville, Bedford, Beaverbank, Lucasville, this is not adequate. They want 24-hour services for ER at Cobequid. My question to the minister is, could you please confirm with me whether or not the new outpatient constructed centre in Bayers Lake is going to have 24-hour ER there, or are these residents going to have to drive downtown after midnight for these services as well? Thank you.
I'd like to once again remind the honourable member to keep his questions directed through the chair. The honourable Premier.
I want to assure the honourable member, the Minister of Health, currently the former Minister of Health, the former Minister of Health, the former Minister of Health, all recognize the important part of Cobequid when it comes to delivering services, not only to the constituents that he represents, but indeed to the broader province across the province. He would also know, under successive governments, those in charge of the Cobequid have laid out what they believe is the best model for them to be able to deliver services. We're going to continue to work with them to ensure that Cobequid continues to be an important part of the delivery of healthcare services in our province. But what we also need to understand, Mr. Speaker, that it requires other primary care centres to be able to deliver services in other communities. That's why we made the decision based on a look at the amount of traffic that's coming in, why we continue to make those investments, Mr. Speaker, to modernize the healthcare system to the needs of our citizens today, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to work with those citizens across our province to ensure that not only will their families be satisfied today, but, Mr. Speaker, their grandchildren will be 50 years from now.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. The Premier has finally announced a $2 billion investment in the province, one that is very welcome and long overdue. That's $2 billion of stimulus spending that we should be leveraging to produce the highest local economic multipliers possible. And we've seen some of that in Dartmouth with the traditional build at the Dartmouth General. But now, by taking the P3 approach, we can be almost certain that millions of dollars in profits will flow out of province instead of paying for more doctors, nurses, local engineers, or tradespeople. Mr. Premier, my question to the Premier is, can he tell Nova Scotians that this contract, possibly the most lucrative contract in our history, will go to a Nova Scotia company?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the bidding process. Mr. Speaker, we'll be pre-qualifying people to make investments into to ensure that they build this hospital on time, on budget. Mr. Speaker, it's certainly my hope that we'll continue to see the activity inside of our province, Mr. Speaker. We're going to see that when it comes to the capital building we're doing in highways, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to see it in the healthcare infrastructure. The private sector is excited, Mr. Speaker, about the opportunities that they see before them, continue to grow their businesses, invest in Nova Scotia families, and invest in the economy of this great province.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, compared to normal procurement, P3s reduce the positive job impacts created by developments. P3 schools are a great example. Developers line their pockets to the tune of $52 million for maintenance contracts to the P3 schools. How will the Premier ensure that design...
Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much. On a point of order, as I was looking through it, I understand the decision that government can make a decision on who answers their question, but we'd appreciate an answer sometime.
It is not a point of order. We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into a committee of the whole House on bills.
The House will now recess while it resolves itself into the committee of the whole House on bills.
Order. I call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole House to order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 39, the Cemetery and Funeral Services Act and Embalmers and Funeral Directors Act.
I call Bill number 39, the Cemetery and Funeral Services Act and Embalmers and Funeral Directors Act. The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 39 contains 16 clauses and was referred back from the Law Amendments Committee without amendments.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Carry. Shall Clauses 2 through 9 carry? Carry. Shall Clause 10 carry? Carry. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move an amendment on page 3, add after Clause 9. Number 10, Chapter 144 is further amended by adding immediately after Section 14 the following section. 14A, bylaws made by the board pursuant to Section 14 must provide that a person who made a complaint to the board and is a witness at an inquiry may be present to hear all evidence presented unless the board determines that witnesses should be excluded from the inquiry until they have testified. And also renumber clauses 10 to 16 as 11 to 17. And for the House, the purpose of this amendment is with respect to presenters and witnesses, as the Bennett family, Gary, has been instrumental in crafting this particular amendment, that witnesses are able to participate to the extent that they would like to at these board hearings, if and when they should take place, which of course we all wish in this House that it will never happen. So this amendment was made it's with respect to the bylaws for the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers, but Gary had felt that he would like to see it enshrined in the legislation. And I just, before I turn it over to my colleague from Kings North, I'd like to add that really this is an amendment that we're bringing in officially, but it was one that was very much crafted by the member from Kings North, working with Gary, with the critic, the member for Inverness. So we were again, as we all had remarked through this process of this bill, Gary and his family have been impacted in a terrible way by this at the worst time in their life. So we just wanted to reflect his wishes, and if there was some comfort in the fact that he would be the one to really shape this legislation so that he could protect this from ever happening to any families and loved ones again. So the member from Kings North worked very closely with my department on this to craft the exact language that would reflect what Gary would like to see, and I think we've landed in a good place, and I think he's going to make some comments now as well.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Kings North.
I'd like to thank the Minister for this amendment and note that, as he has stated, in fact, it was Gary Bennett who really drove the amendment. Gary really had come to my office this summer, really, without me seeking him out, and really had two goals in wanting to see legislation that would ensure that this never happened to anybody else, and really the first part of the bill dealt with that adequately in Mr. Bennett's mind, and the second part of the bill, this section which now is amended, is addressing Mr. Bennett's concern that a family member who makes a complaint be able to hear the complaint and hear the other side. There's a caveat in the amendment, but we're okay with that. We realize there might be some circumstances where that would be needed, but this addresses to a large measure, I think, what the Bennett family, what Gary Bennett had hoped to achieve. He was here in the House all morning waiting for this moment and stepped out. I'm not sure why Gary's not here right now, just sort of bad timing, but I do appreciate his concern and his steady interest in seeing this addressed, and I really admire him for that. And myself and the critic in our caucus is satisfied that this amendment addresses what we hope to achieve in the bill, what Mr. Bennett hoped to achieve in the bill, and thank you.
Shall the amendment carry? Carry. Shall Clause 10 carry? Carry. Shall Clauses 11 through 17 as renumbered carry? Carry. Shall the title, shall the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Okay. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. Just a minute. Okay. Just wait. I recognize the honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you. All members of the House, I just want to introduce Gary Bennett this morning, who is here again. As the House knows, and for Gary's benefit, Gary, we just dealt with that section of the bill just now. My apologies. All right, thank you. We're pleased you're here.
I recognize the honourable government. Oh, just a minute. Do you want to give me the changes? Order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you please call Bill number 29, the Labour Standards Code?
The Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill number 29 was considered in part by this committee on September 28, 2018. The bill contains 18 clauses and was reported to the House from the Law Amendments Committee without amendments. At the Committee of the Whole House on Bills on September 28, clauses 1 to 7 were carried. An amendment by the government to clause 8 was passed, and as I understand it, the NDP now have a further amendment to the carried government amendment to clause 8.
For the benefit of the committee, I want to confirm that we are at clause 8 of Bill number 29. The government amendment to subclause 8.1 on change sheet CWHB Gov 1 was passed by the committee. We are still on clause 8, and I want to recognize the member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll draw the House's attention to CWHB NDP-1 revised. I'd like to move an amendment to page 2, subclause 8, sub 1, re-letter paragraphs A and B as B and C, and add the following paragraph immediately preceding them, striking out 1 year in the second and third lines and substituting 17 weeks. Now, Annette, shall I continue or just do that one? Just that one or both? Okay. It's hard to know where to start on this one, but I will start by saying that the time period proposed by the government in this bill for eligibility for job protection when taking the newly mandated and expanded leave mandated by the federal government for pregnancy is draconian. In BC, New Brunswick, and Quebec, there is no minimum period required for job protection when taking a leave. In Alberta, the time required is 90 days. In Ontario, the time required is 13 weeks. In Saskatchewan, PEI, and Newfoundland, 20 weeks. In Manitoba, 7 months. In Nova Scotia, it's a year, as well as in Nunavut. I wonder, Madam Chair, if the members of the government read the news. if they recognize the structural barriers facing women in society today, if they notice that even professional women are constantly challenged at every step of the way. This is an opportunity to remove a barrier, Madam Chair, an opportunity that the government does not seem poised to take. Madam Chair, equally disturbing to me is the pattern of delay. Since I've been elected to this legislature, this is the third time that we've seen a bill with major problems that's been held either in law amendments or in this committee, and that has come back without a change. It's a pressure release so that the media stops paying attention and that the public stops paying attention. And Madam Chair, I hope that is not the case today. Before I go on, Madam Chair, I'd like to say that it is my understanding that there has been a fulsome discussion of this bill in the government, and I'm glad to see that. It is my understanding that the minister will stand up at the end of this and talk about how there's immediately going to be consultation, and I understand that, and I want to say that I still do not think that that comes close to enough. Would we be consulting, Madam Chair, on basic provisions in a government bill that predominantly impacted the men of this province? No, we would not. This is fundamental, Madam Chair. This is fundamental. The federal government has passed legislation across this country to say that women are entitled to an expanded leave period. And this government is putting a barrier in place to women being able to take advantage of that. Madam Speaker, we have so many women who are not employed for a full year, who struggle to find employment. To say that they should be penalized, that they should not be able to afford to spend time with their children for that reason is, to my mind, unconscionable. And Madam Chair, one more thing. The business owners that I know, the business owners that I'm friends with, that I work with, my colleagues, they want reliable, caring, loyal, long-term employees. They are progressive and they are smart and they know how to run their businesses, and there are lots of things that make running those businesses a challenge. But Madam Chair, after employing a woman for several months, to think that they would not want to be that they would not want to provide this leave provision, that they would not want to tell a woman that her job was available to her when she came back, nobody I know would want that. And so I am mystified as to why. I understand the need for consultation. I think we should be in consultation with all of the various stakeholders in our communities. But to say that we need to consult with businesses about whether women should be able to take a leave to which they are entitled and have a job at the other end makes no sense to me. This is the worst eligibility for job protection in the country. The government is right now taking the opportunity to pass new legislation that makes this the worst job protection eligibility in the country. Once again, the government is asking us to do the right thing, to trust them to do the right thing. I think I got up in this chamber yesterday and talked about that. We're going to do it in the regulations. Just trust us. If they don't accept this amendment, Madam Chair, and if they don't come in line or even come closer to being in line with the rest of Canada, thereby showing this House and the women of this province that they aren't trying to pull the wool over our eyes with another piece of legislation masquerading as housekeeping, that in fact only enshrines the status quo, then it's a sad day for Nova Scotians, Madam Chair. I urge the government to accept this amendment.
Shall the amendment to the amendment carry? No. The amendment to the amendment is defeated. Shall Clause 8, as amended by the government, carry? Shall Clause 9 carry? I recognize the Minister for Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on page 2, add the following after Clause 8. 9, subsection 59A1 of Chapter 246, as amended by Chapter 14 of the Acts of 1991, is amended by adding or such shorter period as may be prescribed by the regulations immediately after year in the fourth line. Pages 2 to 6, clauses 9 to 18, renumber as 10 to 19. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Does the amendment carry? Carry. The amendment is carried. So does Clause 9 carry? Carry. Does Clause 10 carry? Carry. I recognize the Minister for Labour and Advanced Education.
Madam Chair, page 2, subclause 10.1 as renumbered, delete and substitute 1. Subsection 59B1 of Chapter 246 as enacted by Chapter 14 of the Acts of 1991 and amended by Chapter 35 of the Acts of 2000 is further amended by A, adding or such shorter period as may be prescribed by the regulations immediately after year in the second line, and B, striking out 52 in the 8th line and substituting 77. Madam Chair, the government on this side agrees with the premise that the NDP has brought forward, that it should be a shorter period. It will be a shorter period, and that's what these amendments are doing. Consultations have already begun. I do invite the member from Dartmouth South in joining in those consultations. Madam Chair, the one-year period has been in place since 1991, and I think it's important that we realize that. And it wasn't in the original bill. It was brought in at law amendments. Our government agreed with the presenter at law amendments that 1 year is too long, and that's why we're looking at it. Madam Chair, and the reason that we're not arbitrarily picking the federal government period, which was 6 months that was suggested, is because we might go for a shorter period, but we would like all stakeholders, the other parties to speak to it, the broader public to speak to it. And Madam Chair, I hope that we follow the province of BC and New Brunswick where it went to 0. That's my personal opinion, but I will allow others to speak to it and see where we land. And Madam Chair, I commit to the people of Nova Scotia, the shorter period will be in place by this Christmas. Thank you very much.
Shall the amendment carry? Shall clause... Shall Clause 9 carry? Carry. Shall Clause 10 carry? Carry. Shall Clause 10 as renumbered and amended carry? Carry. Do Clauses 11 through 19 as renumbered carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. We're waiting for you. Okay. Right. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that you do now rise and report these bills.
The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its business to the House.
Order, please. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Bills will now report.
That the Committee of the Whole House on Bills has met and considered the following bills. Bills 29 and 39 with certain amendments, and the Chairman has been instructed to recommend these bills to the favourable consideration of the House.
Motion carried. Order that these bills be read a third time on a future day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. I move that the House to now rise to meet again Tuesday, October 9th, 2018, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. Following the daily routine in QP, business will include third readings on bills 29, 39, 49, 51, 55, 58, 63, 67. I would also note that on Tuesday, October 9th, the Committee on Local and Private Bills will meet at 9 a.m. and the Committee on Law Amendments will meet at 10 a.m.
Motion is for the House to rise to adjourn to meet again on Tuesday, October the 9th, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The House now stands adjourned until Tuesday, October the 9th at 1 p.m.